The courthouse was unusually crowded that morning. The air felt heavy with tension, as though every whispered conversation carried the weight of judgment. The room itself looked almost theatrical: tall wooden walls, polished benches lined with anxious spectators, and a high bench where the judge sat with an aura of quiet authority. The polished floors reflected the sharp clicking of shoes as attorneys shuffled in and out, preparing their arguments. At the far end, near the witness stand, sat an officer in uniform, his hand resting firmly on the leash of a German Shepherd police dog. The K9, trained for discipline and obedience, was a striking presence. His amber eyes scanned the room with precision, his ears pricking at every sound. Most in the courtroom avoided staring at him for too long. After all, he wasn't just any dog, he was the living embodiment of law enforcement, a reminder of loyalty and control. People expected him to remain calm, alert, and professional, just like his handler. In the back row, almost unnoticed, sat a young woman holding her daughter tightly against her lap. She had chosen a plain dress, her dark hair pulled back in a simple bun, her eyes fixed on the floor as if trying to avoid being seen. The child, however, was not so easily subdued. A toddler with soft curls and big, searching eyes, she looked around the courtroom with unfiltered curiosity. While her mother's posture screamed of nerves, the little girl had the freedom of innocence. The trial had already begun. The prosecutor was speaking, his voice rising and falling in an attempt to persuade the jury. The defense attorney scribbled notes furiously, waiting for the right moment to object. Jurors sat stiffly, some shifting uncomfortably in their chairs. All the while, the judge adjusted her glasses, scanning the documents before her with practiced composure. It was a scene like many others, a battle of law, evidence, and arguments. And then, without warning, the silence cracked. The toddler, restless in her mother's lap, suddenly straightened. Her small hand shot outward, her index finger pointing across the room. Her eyes locked on the police dog with startling certainty. In a voice that carried far louder than expected from such a small child, she exclaimed, "Doggy!" At first, there was laughter. A few chuckles slipped from the spectators' lips, while even the bailiff smirked at the interruption. The judge sighed, clearly irritated, but not surprised. Children were unpredictable. The mother blushed deeply, whispering for her daughter to be quiet, but the toddler's finger remained firm, her eyes wide and unblinking. The laughter quickly died down. There was something different about the way she pointed. It wasn't just the playful reaction of a child seeing an animal. No, her little face was unusually serious, her gaze unwavering. The German Shepherd, who had been sitting calmly by his handler's side, suddenly tilted his head. His body stiffened before relaxing into something far stranger recognition. His ears perked, his tail gave a single thump against the floor, and his eyes narrowed in on the girl as if she were the only person in the room. A hush fell over the courtroom. The officer tightened his grip on the leash instinctively, but even he could feel the change in the dog's posture. This wasn't the reaction of a trained K9 encountering a stranger. This was personal. The dog's focus was so sharp, so intense, that it unnerved even the judge. The little girl, oblivious to the storm she had just stirred, wriggled free from her mother's arms. She stood, pointing again at the dog with a kind of certainty children rarely had. "Doggy," she repeated, louder this time, her voice echoing through the chamber. Her mother gasped softly, reaching out to pull her back, but the child stood firm. Her small frame looked fragile in the vast seriousness of the courtroom, yet the power in her gesture was undeniable. The judge tapped her gavel once, demanding quiet, but even she couldn't mask her curiosity. "Madam," she said, addressing the mother, "control your child." I'm sorry, Your Honor," the woman stammered, her voice trembling. She tried again to scoop up her daughter, but the girl wriggled away, her eyes never leaving the dog. And then the impossible happened. The police dog stood. Not commanded, not ordered, he rose on his own. His handler pulled back on the leash, startled, but the K9 resisted. His tail wagged furiously now, his body straining forward toward the child. The officer whispered sharp commands, but the dog ignored them, his focus locked entirely on the toddler. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. This was not normal. Police dogs were trained for absolute obedience, their behavior disciplined beyond question. For one to disobey his handler in the middle of court was unheard of. The child giggled, taking a step forward, her tiny shoes clicking softly against the courtroom floor. "Doggy remembers me," she said in a sing-song voice that carried across the stunned silence. Her words made her mother freeze. A look of shock rippled across her face, followed by something else, fear. The spectators leaned in, whispering rapidly to one another. The judge leaned back in her chair, her expression caught between disbelief and fascination. The officer holding the leash looked visibly shaken, his jaw tightening as he pulled harder against the dog's resistance. And the toddler kept walking. Every eye in the room followed her as she toddled toward the police dog, her hand outstretched. It was as if the trial, the lawyers, the evidence, all of it had disappeared. The only story now was between the child and the canine. The dog let out a low, almost mournful whine, a sound so unlike his usual sharp alerts that it sent shivers down the spines of those who heard it. The mother whispered urgently, "No, no, please." But it was too late. The child's hand landed gently on the dog's head. The courtroom, for a heartbeat, seemed to stop breathing. The dog pressed his head against the girl's tiny palm, closing his eyes as if he had found something, or someone he had been waiting for. His body relaxed completely, tail thumping happily against the floor. The officer's grip on the leash slackened, his face pale as though he had just witnessed a ghost. The mother covered her mouth with both hands, tears springing to her eyes. No one could explain what was happening. Not yet. But everyone in that room, Judge, lawyers, jurors, spectators knew they were witnessing the beginning of something extraordinary, something that would change the course of the trial, and perhaps even lives. The silence was deafening, and all of it began with a toddler pointing at a police dog. The judge's gavel struck the sound block again, sharper this time, its echo bouncing off the wooden walls. The murmurs died, but the tension only grew thicker. Every eye remained fixed on the child, her small hand still resting against the German shepherd's head. What had begun as a distraction had already transformed into something far more unsettling. The officer tugged at the leash, his commands coming quicker now, more forceful. "Sit, heel, sit." Yet the canine ignored him. Instead, the dog leaned into the little girl's touch, tail wagging in steady, confident beats against the courtroom floor. It was as though his training, drilled for years into his instincts, had evaporated in that single moment of recognition. The defense attorney leaned back in his chair, eyebrows raised in fascination. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably, flipping through his notes as if searching for a legal objection that didn't exist. The jury watched in stunned silence, their eyes flicking between the toddler and the restless officer. The judge exhaled slowly, adjusting her glasses. "Officer," she said sternly, "control your animal." The officer's jaw tightened, a bead of sweat forming at his temple. "Yes, Your Honor," he answered, tugging again at the leash. But the dog refused to budge. His eyes never left the child, as though tethered by something invisible and unexplainable. The toddler giggled softly, her fingers running through the dog's fur. "Good doggy," she whispered, her voice carrying across the otherwise silent room. It wasn't just the words. It was the way she spoke them. There was a familiarity in her tone, the ease of a child who knew this dog beyond the confines of the courtroom. Her mother, frozen in the back row, finally sprang to her feet. "Sweetheart, come back," she pleaded, her voice cracking. Panic colored her tone, though no one understood why yet. "Please come here." The child turned slightly, glancing back at her mother with wide, innocent eyes. "But Mommy," she said loudly, "he knows me." Gasps rippled through the spectators. A few whispered to each other, the words "knows her," traveling like wildfire across the benches. The mother's face paled as she shook her head desperately, as if trying to undo her daughter's words with sheer will. The judge leaned forward, curiosity piercing her otherwise stoic demeanor. "What exactly is happening here?" she asked, her voice sharp but laced with a curiosity even she couldn't mask. "Why is this child insisting the animal knows her?" No one answered. The silence grew unbearable. The officer, finally managing to pull the leash taut, forced the dog to step back an inch. But the animal growled low in protest, not with aggression, but with reluctance, like a friend being pulled away from someone they loved. The officer cursed under his breath, his grip white-knuckled, his composure cracking under the weight of dozens of watching eyes. The little girl stepped closer again, fearless, undeterred by the strain in the leash or the tension in the room. She reached out with both hands, clutching the dog's neck and pressing her face into his fur. The dog's body relaxed instantly, tail wagging again in slow, heavy thumps. "Order!" the judge barked, slamming the gavel. But even her voice, commanding as it was, couldn't break the spell of the moment. The defense attorney rose from his seat, his voice steady but dripping with opportunity. "Your Honor," he said, "I believe what we are witnessing is extraordinary. Perhaps the child recognizes the dog from before. Perhaps—" "Sit down," the prosecutor snapped, glaring across the aisle. "This is not relevant to the trial." But the judge didn't silence the defense. She kept her eyes locked on the child, studying her intently. Something about the girl's innocence tugged at her own instincts. It was rare, almost unheard of, that a child would disrupt proceedings in such a way. And rarer still that a dog, a trained canine, would abandon all discipline for the embrace of a toddler. The mother tried again to intervene, stepping down the aisle. "Your Honor, please forgive us," she begged, her voice trembling. "She's just a child. She doesn't understand." But the toddler looked up at the judge with a face that seemed too wise for her years. "He remembers," she said softly, almost like a secret. "He remembers, Daddy." The courtroom froze. The mother's breath caught in her throat. The officer's hand trembled on the leash. The jurors exchanged uneasy glances, as though the weight of those simple words had just shifted the entire tone of the trial. The judge's pen dropped onto her desk, rolling noisily across the surface. "What did she just say?" she asked carefully, her eyes narrowing. The toddler repeated, louder this time, her voice clear and unwavering. "Doggy remembers Daddy." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the hum of the overhead lights seemed to fade. The dog barked once, sharp but not aggressive, almost as though in agreement. His body pressed firmly into the child's embrace, tail wagging harder now, his eyes locked onto hers, with a gaze that carried more meaning than words could. The officer tugged the leash desperately, but his expression betrayed him. His face was pale, his lips drawn tight. Deep inside, he seemed to know what this meant. The mother, tears streaming now, shook her head violently. "No, no, please. She doesn't understand what she's saying." Her voice cracked, her body trembling with fear. But it was too late. The courtroom had already latched onto the child's words. The defense attorney slowly rose again, his tone softer this time. "Your Honor," he said carefully. "With respect, I believe this." Recognition. may be tied directly to the facts of this case. It cannot be ignored. The prosecutor slammed his notebook shut, furious. This is ridiculous. We cannot take the babble of a toddler as credible evidence. But even as he spoke, his words rang hollow. Everyone had seen it, the dog's undeniable reaction, the child's fearless approach, the way the room itself seemed to bend under the weight of her innocent truth. The judge leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. She studied the child, the mother, the officer, and the restless dog. Her hands folded over each other as she considered the implications. Finally, she spoke, her voice calm but firm. "We will take a recess." The gavel struck once more, but the sound felt different this time, not an order, but a signal. As people stood, whispering furiously, the officer bent down to his dog, his hand gripping the leash tighter than ever. The German shepherd's tail wagged slowly, his eyes still following the toddler, as though unwilling to let her out of his sight. And the little girl, holding her mother's hand now, looked back at the dog with a quiet smile, repeating once more in her sing-song voice, "Doggy remembers Daddy." The courtroom, already rattled, had no idea just how much those words would unravel in the hours to come. The courtroom felt transformed after recess. What had begun as a routine trial now carried a heavy tension that no one could shake. The jurors whispered among themselves as they filed back into the box, their eyes darting toward the mother and child. Even the bailiff, usually an unshakable figure of discipline, couldn't hide his curiosity as he glanced at the German shepherd seated near the officer. The canine had not taken his eyes off the little girl. Even during the break, while the courtroom emptied and filled again, the dog's focus never shifted. His handler tugged him back into position repeatedly, whispering stern commands, but the animal resisted in subtle ways, leaning forward, ears twitching at every sound from the child. It wasn't the behavior of a working dog on duty. It was something else entirely. The judge returned, tapping her gavel lightly to restore order. "We will proceed," she said, though her voice was quieter than before, almost reflective. She looked at the toddler with an expression that betrayed both annoyance and curiosity. "And I expect no further interruptions." The mother sat stiffly, holding her daughter's hand with a grip that bordered on painful. Her knuckles were white, her face pale. She whispered urgent words into her child's ear, words only a parent desperate to contain the truth might use. But the toddler wasn't listening. Her eyes never left the dog. The German shepherd sat tall now, ears pricked, eyes gleaming with intensity. He wasn't merely reacting, he was recognizing. Those who had watched him before knew the difference. His behavior had slipped from protocol into something personal, and the shift unnerved everyone who noticed. The prosecutor rose again, trying to steer the trial back into familiar territory. His voice rang sharp with authority. "Your Honor, the defense may attempt to use this distraction as leverage, but the facts of the case remain unchanged. We are not here to discuss dogs or children. We are here to discuss the charges at hand." But his words fell flat. No one could focus on the charges anymore, not after what they had seen. The jury's eyes kept drifting toward the girl. The defense attorney smiled faintly, sensing the room's shifting energy. He didn't have to say anything, not yet. The courtroom itself was doing the work for him. The little girl fidgeted in her seat, then tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mommy," she said loudly enough for half the courtroom to hear, "why's Doggy here without Daddy?" Her mother froze. The words struck like a hammer. The prosecutor slammed his fist against the table. "Objection. This is entirely inappropriate." The judge silenced him with a look. "Sit down." The jurors exchanged glances, their curiosity deepening. The defense attorney leaned forward, his pen poised but unmoving. He didn't need to prompt the child. She was unraveling truths on her own. The officer holding the leash looked as though the ground had given way beneath him. His lips pressed into a thin line, his knuckles white. For years, he had trusted this dog with his life. He had seen him in raids, searches, tense standoffs where the canine never faltered. But this was new. The dog wasn't obeying training. He was obeying memory. The mother pulled her daughter close, whispering sharply, "Quiet, please, quiet." Her voice cracked, betraying a deep fear that made the spectators lean in closer. Fear was often the scent of hidden truth. The German shepherd shifted suddenly, emitting a sound that sent shivers through the courtroom. It wasn't a bark, nor a growl, but something softer, a whine, low and aching, the sound of recognition. His eyes stayed locked on the child, his ears flattening slightly, as though yearning to close the gap between them. The little girl responded instantly. She smiled, her tiny hand stretching out as far as it could reach. "See, Mommy?" she announced to the room. "He remembers me." A murmur rippled across the benches. The jurors leaned forward. Even the judge sat back in her chair, troubled, her pen motionless. The defense attorney finally rose, his voice slow and deliberate. "Your Honor, with all due respect, what we are witnessing cannot be ignored. The child claims recognition. The animal displays behavior consistent with recognition. This court must ask what history lies between them." The prosecutor stood furiously, nearly knocking his chair back. "This is absurd. A dog cannot testify. A toddler cannot provide credible evidence. We are wasting the court's time." But the dog barked suddenly, sharp and piercing, silencing him mid-sentence. It wasn't aggression. It was insistence. He barked again, stepping forward, the leash straining against the officer's grip. The courtroom flinched, startled. The little girl laughed, clapping her hands. "That's Daddy's doggy," she shouted, her voice bright and unashamed. The officer's face drained of color. His hand trembled against the leash, and for the first time in years, he looked less like a disciplined guardian of the law, and more like a man cornered by ghosts of the past. The mother buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. She knew it was over. The judge leaned forward, her voice sharper now. "Explain this." Her command was directed not at the child, nor at the mother, but at the officer. All eyes turned to him. The officer swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. He tried to steady his voice, but it wavered. "Your Honor, this dog." He hesitated, his grip tightening. This dog was previously assigned to another handler, an undercover officer. The courtroom held its breath. The officer's gaze flickered to the mother, then back to the child, his voice lowering. That officer disappeared. Years ago. The mother let out a sob, the sound muffled by her hands. The little girl turned to her mother, confused. "Mommy, why are you crying?" "Doggy found us again." The German shepherd barked once more, straining forward as though to confirm the girl's words. His handler's grip faltered, not from weakness, but from the weight of truth pressing down on him. The courtroom was no longer focused on the trial at hand. The charges, the evidence, the witnesses, all of it had been overshadowed by something far more powerful. An unspoken connection between a child, a mother, and a dog that carried memories no one wanted unearthed. For the jurors, it was no longer about the case. It was about the truth, raw, painful, undeniable, that had slipped through the cracks of the legal system and revealed itself in the most unexpected way. The judge, her expression unreadable, struck the gavel once. "This court will adjourn for the day." But as the room emptied, whispers filled the air. Everyone knew the trial would never be the same again. And at the center of it all stood a child clutching a dog's neck, and a dog who refused to forget. The following morning, the courthouse was packed tighter than ever. The events of the previous day had spread like wildfire beyond the courtroom walls. Reporters lingered outside, hoping to catch a glimpse of the mother and child. Court staff whispered in the hallways, speculating on what had really happened between the little girl and the German shepherd. Even the jurors walked in with guarded expressions, their minds replaying the haunting words, "Doggy remembers Daddy." Inside the courtroom, silence fell the moment the judge entered. She looked sterner than usual, but her eyes betrayed fatigue. Perhaps she hadn't slept well either. Perhaps she too had replayed the child's words again and again in her mind. The officer sat rigid at the front, the dog at his side. Unlike yesterday, the leash was gripped with both hands, as though strength alone might keep control over what had already spiraled far beyond obedience. The German shepherd, however, remained unmoved. His gaze was steady, unwavering, fixed once again on the toddler who sat with her mother. The girl leaned against her mother's shoulder, kicking her small shoes against the bench. She wasn't nervous. If anything, she looked more confident than the adults around her, as though she had already uncovered a truth everyone else was afraid to say aloud. The judge's gavel came down. Court is in session. The prosecutor wasted no time. His tone was clipped, irritated, as if the very presence of the dog and child was an insult to his case. "Your Honor, yesterday's proceedings were derailed by an outburst from a toddler, no less. I request that the court dismiss any future interruptions that may cause further distraction." But the defense attorney stood quickly, his eyes gleaming. "With respect, Your Honor, I must disagree. What occurred yesterday cannot be brushed aside. A child recognized a police canine by association with her father, who, as we have now learned, was a missing officer. That recognition, however innocent, may very well tie directly to the truth of this case." The judge looked down from her bench, her gaze moving deliberately toward the child. The mother stiffened, pulling her daughter closer. "Bring the child forward," the judge said. The courtroom gasped. The mother rose instantly. "Your Honor, please, she's just a little girl. She doesn't understand the weight of these proceedings." "She understood enough to say what she did yesterday," the judge replied calmly. "The court must allow her words to be heard." The bailiff approached, guiding the hesitant mother and her daughter forward. The toddler walked beside her mother, clutching her hand but keeping her chin lifted, her eyes fixed on the dog waiting at the front. The German shepherd rose to his feet, tail wagging low and steady. The officer pulled the leash sharply, but the dog resisted, letting out a soft whine that filled the silence. The judge leaned forward. "Young lady," she said gently, "can you tell us what you told us yesterday?" The toddler blinked, her small voice carrying through the still air. "Doggy remembers Daddy. Who is Daddy?" the judge asked. The girl pointed a tiny finger at her mother, then at the dog. "Daddy was his friend. Doggy lived with us before." The room erupted in murmurs. The defense attorney scribbled furiously on his notepad. The prosecutor slammed his hand against the table. "Objection. This is baseless. The child is too young to be credible. She could be influenced by her mother, by media, But the judge cut him off. "Order." Her gavel struck. The murmurs died again. She turned her gaze toward the officer, holding the leash. "Is this true?" The officer's throat bobbed. His lips parted, but no words came at first. Finally, with a voice low and strained, he answered. "The dog was partnered with an undercover agent. His name was Officer James Carter. He disappeared 5 years ago during an operation. The case was classified. The K-9 was reassigned." The mother gasped audibly, clutching her daughter tightly. The little girl looked up at her mother innocently. "See? Doggy was Daddy's doggy." The courtroom froze. For the first time, The officer's composure cracked. His voice grew sharper, defensive. "Your Honor, this is irrelevant. The case at hand has nothing to do with the disappearance of Officer Carter. The child she doesn't understand." But before he could finish, the toddler stepped forward, tugging away from her mother's hand. She looked directly at the officer and spoke with surprising clarity for someone so small. "You kept Doggy away. Daddy told Doggy to take care of us." The words hit like thunder. The mother collapsed into tears, covering her mouth with shaking hands. The officer staggered back a step, the leash trembling in his grip. The German shepherd barked once, loudly, his entire body straining toward the child. The judge slammed her gavel, but even she couldn't mask the shock in her eyes. "Officer," she said, her tone sharp, "what does this child mean?" The officer's face twisted with inner conflict. He glanced at the dog, then at the mother, then back at the judge. Sweat lined his brow. I don't know. She's confused. She couldn't possibly remember. She was too young. The defense attorney stepped forward. And yet she does remember. She remembers enough to identify this animal as her father's partner. She remembers enough to expose what others have been trying to bury. He turned to the jury, his voice booming. What is truth if not this? A child too innocent to lie, and a dog too loyal to forget. The prosecutor rose again, his voice nearly shouting. This is nonsense. A toddler's words are not evidence. This court cannot allow. The German shepherd barked again, loud and insistent, cutting him off. The leash snapped taut, the dog pulling hard toward the girl, his body quivering with recognition. He whined, pawing the floor, his eyes locked on her. The toddler reached out, her little voice breaking through the chaos. It's okay, doggy, I'm here. The silence that followed was suffocating. No one dared move, no one dared speak. And in that silence, the truth surfaced not in legal documents or testimonies, but in the bond between a child and a dog, a bond unbroken by time, by loss, by lies. The judge finally broke the silence. Her voice was steady, but heavy. This court cannot ignore what has been revealed here. The truth may be hidden in sealed files and forgotten cases, but it has found its way back into this courtroom, through the words of a child and the loyalty of a dog. She turned to the shaken officer. And it will be investigated, thoroughly. The gavel came down hard. Court is adjourned until further notice. The crowd erupted in noise, reporters scrambling for the door, jurors whispering in shock. The mother sank to her knees, clutching her daughter, tears streaming down her face. The officer sat frozen, his grip on the leash limp. And the German shepherd, free at last as the leash slipped from the officer's hand, walked straight to the toddler and rested his head in her lap as though he had finally come home. The truth had surfaced, and it was only the beginning. The courtroom had never been so quiet, yet so full of emotion. The gavel's echo still lingered in the air, but the silence that followed was deafening. The dog lay calmly with his head in the toddler's lap, as if the very chaos of the courtroom no longer mattered. For him, his mission was complete. He had found the one person he had been waiting for. But for the humans in the room, the mission was far from over. The judge had called for recess, yet no one seemed eager to leave. Jurors sat stiff, whispering amongst themselves. The defense attorney scribbled notes furiously, his mind racing to connect the pieces that had just spilled out in the child's innocent voice. The prosecutor paced angrily, his hands clenched behind his back, his lips pressed thin as he searched for a way to contain the damage. At the center of it all was the mother, tears streaming silently down her face. She held her daughter close, stroking her hair, torn between pride and fear. Pride that her little girl had spoken the truth so boldly, fear for what would come of it, fear of reopening a past she had spent years trying to bury. The officer sat slumped on the bench, his face pale, his composure broken. For the first time in years, he looked less like a figure of authority and more like a man haunted by choices he could no longer defend. His eyes never left the German shepherd, who seemed to have betrayed years of training in favor of an unshakable loyalty to the child. When the judge returned, she didn't waste time. "This recess is over. We will continue." "Officer Daniels," she said, addressing the man holding the leash, "the time for evasions has passed. You will answer clearly. Did you knowingly withhold information about this dog's original handler?" Daniels swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Yes, Your Honor." A sharp gasp echoed from the mother. The defense attorney froze mid-note, his pen hanging in the air. The prosecutor slammed his fist softly against the table, but said nothing. "Yes," the judge pressed. "And why?" Daniel's voice cracked, as though the words had been locked away for years. "Because I was ordered to." After Officer Carter disappeared, the department closed the case. Officially, they said it was unresolved, classified, a failed operation. But unofficially, he stopped, glancing around nervously. "Unofficially what?" The judge pressed, her tone sharper. Daniels exhaled shakily. "Unofficially, they didn't want the family to know. There were rumors that Carter had been betrayed from within, that someone in law enforcement had leaked information about his assignment. If that were true..." His voice trailed off. The defense attorney seized the opportunity. "So instead of finding justice, you hid the dog away, reassigned him, and pretended Carter had simply vanished." Daniel's hands shook. "I had no choice. Orders came from above. The dog was my responsibility after Carter disappeared. I didn't ask questions I couldn't. My career, my family, my safety. Everything was on the line." The little girl looked up at him then, her innocent voice breaking through the tension. "Doggy cried at night. He missed Daddy. Why didn't you bring him back to us?" The question pierced deeper than any cross-examination could. Daniel's shoulders slumped, his eyes wet. For a moment, the hardened officer disappeared, replaced by a broken man facing a child's honesty. I couldn't," he whispered. "I thought I was protecting you." The mother rose suddenly, her voice trembling but strong. "Protecting us? You let my daughter grow up thinking her father abandoned her. You let me grieve in silence, with no answers, no closure. And all the while, his dog, the one piece of him left, was kept away from us. How dare you call that protection?" The courtroom stirred. Some jurors wiped their eyes. Even the judge leaned back slightly, as if weighed down by the rawness of the mother's words. The prosecutor, sensing the case unraveling, jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this is irrelevant. The defendant on trial has nothing to do with this family's tragedy. We cannot allow the courtroom to be transformed into an emotional theater." But the judge shook her head. "On the contrary, Counselor, what has been revealed affects the credibility of evidence, the integrity of testimony, and the trustworthiness of law enforcement witnesses in this very case. Emotional or not, it matters." The defense attorney leaned forward, his voice quiet but cutting. "Officer Daniels, tell us what really happened to Officer Carter. Did you know?" Daniels squeezed his eyes shut. A long silence stretched. Finally, he spoke, each word heavy with guilt. "I don't know the whole truth, but I know he didn't just vanish. The last message I ever heard him give was not to me, it was to the dog. He told him, 'Take care of them.' Those were his last words." The mother sobbed openly now, her knees buckling. The bailiff rushed to steady her. The little girl looked up at her mother, patting her arm with childlike tenderness. "See, Mommy? Daddy said Doggy would help us. He didn't forget." The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. What had begun as a simple criminal trial was no longer just about guilt or innocence. It was about trust, betrayal, family, and the haunting shadow of secrets too long buried. The defense attorney turned to the jury. You've heard it from a child too innocent to be coached. You've heard it from a man who could no longer hide his conscience. This courtroom is not just a place for legal arguments, it is a place for truth. And truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep it is buried. The judge sighed deeply, her expression heavy with the weight of the revelations. This case has taken a direction none of us expected, but we cannot unhear what has been said. The testimonies here will be preserved, and this matter will not end until the truth is fully revealed. For a moment, no one moved. And then, as if on cue, the German shepherd lifted his head, barked once, and placed his paw gently on the little girl's lap, as though sealing the confession with his own wordless testimony. The room erupted again, not in chaos this time, but in emotion. Mothers clutching their children tighter, officers shifting uncomfortably in their seats, jurors exchanging knowing looks. And in the center of it all, the little girl smiled through her tears, whispering to the dog, "Thank you for telling them. Doggy, thank you for being brave." It was a confession the courtroom would never forget, not from the officer, not from the mother, but from a child whose truth shattered walls of silence no one else dared break. The weight of the courtroom's revelations pressed most heavily on one person, the mother. For years, she had lived in shadows, carrying the grief of a husband who had disappeared without warning, without closure. She had built her life around silence, raising her daughter alone, pretending to be strong when inside she was breaking. Now, standing in front of a crowded courtroom with reporters scribbling notes and strangers staring, she felt every wound reopening. The world was finally hearing what she had carried alone for half a decade, and it was unbearable. She gripped the wooden railing before her knuckles white. Her tears were not just for what was said in court, they were for the nights she had cradled her infant daughter while whispering lies she never wanted to tell. Lies like, "Daddy will come home," long after she stopped believing it herself. The judge turned her gaze on her. "Ma'am, I realize this is difficult, but if you are willing, we need to hear your side. What did you know about your husband's disappearance?" The mother's breath trembled as she steadied herself. Her daughter looked up at her with wide, trusting eyes. She couldn't hide anymore. "I knew something was wrong the night he left," she began, her voice shaky but determined. "James, my husband, was restless for days. He kept checking the windows, double-checking locks, walking the perimeter of our house at night. He told me it was just stress from work, but I could feel the fear in him. He kissed our baby girl that night and whispered something to her, something I didn't hear. Then he left, and he never came back." A ripple moved through the crowd. The defense attorney leaned forward, his expression sympathetic but sharp. "Did you ever receive any explanation from the department?" She laughed bitterly through her tears. "Explanation? They gave me nothing. They said he was missing in action, possibly compromised during an undercover assignment. They offered sympathy, but no answers. No body to bury. No investigation I could trust. Just silence. Silence and a folded flag that felt like mockery." The toddler tugged at her dress, her small voice breaking through her mother's pain. "Mommy, Daddy didn't leave us. Doggy knows." The courtroom stilled again. Her words, though simple, cut deeper than anything her mother could say. The judge nodded solemnly. "Go on." The mother wiped her tears. "I tried to move on. For her." She looked down at her daughter. "I worked 2 jobs. I kept food on the table. I made sure she had a childhood, even when I cried myself to sleep every night. But deep down, I always felt something wasn't right. James wasn't the kind of man to abandon his family. And when I learned his canine partner had been reassigned, hidden away, my suspicion grew. That dog was trained to stay loyal until death. So why was he kept from us? What were they hiding? Her voice grew sharper, her sorrow transforming into fury. She turned toward Officer Daniels, who sat with his head bowed. You let me live like a widow when I didn't even know if I was one. You watched me struggle, watched me raise his daughter alone, and never once thought to tell me the truth. Do you know how cruel that is? Daniels raised his head slowly, guilt etched deep in his face. I told myself I was following orders, that it was for your safety. But the truth is, I was a coward. I couldn't face you. Every time I looked at you, I saw James. I saw the life he was supposed to come back to. And I couldn't bear it. Tears streamed down the mother's face as she shook her head. Your cowardice stole years from us. Years my daughter will never get back. Do you know how many times she asked about her father? Do you know how it feels to lie to your child? Because the truth is too heavy for her little heart? The toddler wrapped her small arms around her mother's waist, sensing her pain. It's okay, Mommy. Doggy remembers Daddy. Doggy didn't forget. The German shepherd, as if understanding, placed his paw on the girl's foot and looked up at the mother. His steady gaze was both comforting and heartbreaking, a silent reminder that part of James had always been alive, waiting, suffering in silence just as she had. The defense attorney stepped in carefully, his tone respectful. Ma'am, did you ever suspect foul play? That perhaps your husband didn't simply vanish but was silenced? Her lips quivered. She hesitated, but finally she nodded. Yes, I suspected it every day. James told me once, before he left on his assignment, that if anything ever happened to him, I should trust the dog. He said, he knows more than anyone else ever will. At the time, I thought it was just his way of saying the dog would protect us. But now I wonder if he knew he was walking into a trap. The courtroom filled with uneasy whispers. The prosecutor rose quickly. Objection, Your Honor. This is pure speculation, unsubstantiated and irrelevant to the current charges. The judge silenced him with a single look. This may go beyond the current trial, Counselor, but it is far from irrelevant. It speaks to corruption, to cover-ups, and to whether this courtroom can even trust the integrity of the very officers testifying here. The mother's tears slowed, replaced by resolve. For the first time, she straightened her shoulders, her voice growing strong. I may not know the full truth, but I know one thing. My daughter saw what we all refused to see. Her father's dog never forgot us. And in his loyalty, he revealed what grown men hid in fear. That is not the imagination of a child. That is truth. Her words rang in the air, undeniable. Even the most hardened faces in the courtroom softened. Some jurors dabbed their eyes. Others exchanged glances that showed their faith in the prosecution's case was wavering. The judge leaned back, her expression unreadable but heavy with thought. She finally spoke, her voice carrying the weight of justice itself. The pain of this family cannot be ignored. The loyalty of this dog cannot be dismissed. And the silence surrounding Officer Carter's disappearance must be broken. This court will not be another chamber of secrets. We will pursue this further. The mother sank back into her seat, her daughter curling into her lap. She kissed the child's forehead, whispering, You were braver than all of us. Sweetheart. The little girl smiled, whispering back, I just told the truth. Mommy. The German shepherd lay down at their feet, his head resting across the child's shoes, as though he had finally fulfilled his master's last command. And for the first time in 5 years, the mother felt the heavy chains around her heart begin to loosen. The struggle wasn't over, but she no longer carried it alone. The courtroom was restless, charged with an energy no one could suppress. The mother's confessions still hung heavy in the air, but it was clear to everyone that the heart of the story no longer belonged to her or to the officers. It belonged to the little girl, who sat quietly with her legs swinging from the bench, her small hand resting on the German shepherd's head. The judge adjusted her glasses and spoke with unusual softness. "Miss, would you be willing to talk to us today? You don't have to, if you don't want to." The toddler nodded without hesitation. "I can talk." The prosecutor nearly leapt from his seat. "Your Honor, this is absurd. We cannot treat the words of a toddler as sworn testimony." A judge's gavel came down hard. "Counselor, you've objected enough. This child has spoken truth that no adult dared to admit. The court will hear her." The little girl was led gently to the witness chair, her tiny legs barely reaching the edge. A bailiff swore her in, though everyone knew the ritual meant little to someone so young. Still, her wide eyes and calm demeanor filled the room with an authority no oath could match. The defense attorney crouched to her level, offering a reassuring smile. "Sweetheart, can you tell us what you remember about your daddy and his dog?" She looked down at the German shepherd, who sat faithfully by her side, and lifted her gaze back up. Daddy loved Doggy. Doggy loved Daddy. They went everywhere together. Sometimes Daddy would come home late, and Doggy would be dirty, but Daddy always hugged him before he hugged us. He said Doggy was family too. The jurors leaned forward, visibly moved. The defense attorney nodded. "And what did Daddy tell you before he left?" Her voice was soft, but it carried across the courtroom. "He told Doggy to take care of us. He told him, if I don't come back, you know what to do." The room was so quiet, it seemed even the air was listening. The prosecutor stood, unable to restrain himself. "Objection, hearsay." The child cannot recall exact conversations, but the judge cut him off sharply. "Overruled. Let her continue." The little girl fidgeted for a moment, then straightened with surprising firmness. "Doggy tried to come back. He remembers. But they didn't let him. They kept him away. He cried when Daddy didn't come home. And I cried too. Mommy said Daddy was gone, but Doggy knew Daddy was still talking to him." A soft gasp rippled through the room. One juror dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. The defense attorney pressed gently. "What do you mean, sweetheart? How did Doggy know?" The child smiled faintly, her innocence shining through. "Because Doggy never forgets. When I saw him here, he remembered me. He remembered Daddy's smell on me. That's why he came to me. He wasn't listening to the officer, because he knew I was Daddy's little girl." The German shepherd, as if on cue, leaned into her lap, his eyes locked on her face. The gesture was undeniable. The courtroom erupted in murmurs again. Even the bailiff, a man known for his stoic demeanor, shifted uncomfortably, clearly fighting back emotion. The judge leaned forward. "Young lady, do you believe your daddy wanted Doggy to stay with you?" The toddler didn't hesitate. "Yes, because Doggy is family. And family doesn't forget." Her words were like arrows, piercing through every layer of legal strategy, bureaucracy, and corruption that had clouded the truth. A child's simple declaration stripped the case down to its essence: love, loyalty, and betrayal. The mother wept silently, her hand pressed over her mouth. Officer Daniels sat with his head in his hands, unable to meet the child's gaze. Even the prosecutor, though furious, could not mask the tremor in his voice as he muttered under his breath. The defense attorney stood tall. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I ask you what clearer truth can exist than this? A child too young to lie, a dog too loyal to forget, and a family robbed of both a father and the comfort his partner could have given them. Is this justice? Or is this the silencing of truth by those who feared it? The prosecutor finally exploded. This is emotional manipulation. We cannot let a toddler dictate the course of a trial. The judge slammed the gavel so hard it echoed like thunder. Enough. If you cannot see the weight of what has just been said, counselor, then you are blind to the very purpose of this court. Justice is not blind to truth, no matter where it comes from. The little girl tilted her head, her brows furrowed in confusion. Why don't they just tell the truth? Daddy said lying makes people sick inside. Her words sliced through the air like a blade. The jurors shifted uncomfortably, some lowering their eyes as if ashamed. Daniels finally lifted his head, his face ashen, his voice cracking. She's right. I lied. I told myself it was duty, that it was orders, but the truth is, I was too afraid to face what really happened to her father. Too afraid to admit that maybe someone in this very system betrayed him. The prosecutor froze, eyes widening. The defense attorney seized the moment. You see, members of the jury, truth has a way of slipping through cracks, no matter how tightly it's sealed. This little girl has opened the floodgates, and the truth is flooding in. The judge took a deep breath, her hands folded in front of her. What we have heard today cannot be undone. It will shape not only this trial, but the course of investigations to come. The words of this child have carried more weight than volumes of testimony from men sworn to serve justice. The little girl, unaware of the magnitude of her role, hugged the German shepherd tightly, burying her face in his fur. It's okay, doggy. Daddy's proud of us. And for a moment, the entire courtroom seemed to believe her. The courtroom was still buzzing with the echoes of the child's testimony. Her words had cut through years of secrecy, fear, and silence, leaving adults stunned and uneasy. Officer Daniels sat rigid, the leash of the German shepherd slack in his hands, his face pale and drawn. The mother clutched her daughter tightly, whispering reassurances that she barely felt herself. And the child, unaware of the gravity of her role, stroked the dog's fur, whispering quietly, "It's okay. Doggy, we're together now." The judge adjusted her glasses and cleared her throat, bringing the room to silence. Every head turned toward her. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes carried a weight that everyone felt deep in their bones. "This courtroom has witnessed events that go beyond ordinary proceedings," she began, her voice steady but heavy. "We have seen the truth of loyalty, the courage of innocence, and the power of love to pierce through years of deception. The testimony of this child, and the unspoken witness of her father's dog, has made clear what the law alone could not." The defense attorney nodded quietly, his pen poised, but no longer needed to document the spectacle unfolding. The prosecutor's jaw tightened, his fury tempered by the undeniable force of what had been revealed. Even the bailiff, known for his stoic demeanor, blinked as though he were seeing the world in a different light. The judge continued, "Officer Daniels, your actions, while dictated by orders, have left the family in pain for far too long. Your fear of consequences cannot justify withholding a truth so vital to those who are most vulnerable. However, your willingness to admit your mistakes here today will be taken into consideration. The court recognizes that truth has its own gravity, one that must guide the next steps of this investigation." Daniels exhaled slowly, relief and shame mixing on his face. He looked down at the German shepherd, whose steady gaze seemed almost judgmental, yet forgiving. The dog had been his partner too, and now he understood the true depth of loyalty he had been entrusted with. The mother, still clutching her daughter, finally spoke, her voice breaking the silence. "Your Honor, for years I have carried a burden too heavy for one person. But my daughter, she carried the memory of her father's love in her heart, even when I tried to shield her from the truth. She reminds us that justice is not always a matter of paperwork or procedure. Sometimes it is about recognizing what cannot be hidden. The little girl looked up at her mother, her wide eyes innocent, but filled with clarity beyond her years. "Mommy, Daddy wouldn't want anyone sad. Doggy helped us. I told them, and they listened." The courtroom murmured in quiet awe. Even the jurors, who had been instructed to focus solely on the charges at hand, found themselves moved by the child's simple declaration. It was undeniable. Truth, unfiltered and unafraid, had emerged from the smallest voice in the room. The judge nodded slowly. Indeed, this courtroom has been transformed, not just by testimony or evidence, but by courage. Courage comes in many forms. The bravery of a child speaking her truth, the loyalty of a dog it refused to forget, and even the honesty of an officer who admitted his failings. It is a reminder that the law is meant to serve truth, not hide from it. A hush fell over the courtroom as the judge paused, letting her words settle into the hearts of everyone present. Then she continued, her tone firm but compassionate. "The disappearance of Officer James Carter will be reinvestigated. His family, who has suffered in silence for far too long, will have the right to closure they deserve. Officer Daniels will cooperate fully with authorities to uncover the events that led to his disappearance and to ensure that no further injustice occurs." She glanced at the little girl and the dog, their bond evident to all. "And as for you, young lady, and your father's loyal companion, you have reminded this court of the importance of loyalty, of memory, and of speaking truth even when it is uncomfortable. Your bravery will be recorded here as a guiding example for all who seek justice." Tears streamed down the mother's face as she embraced her daughter, whispering words of gratitude and relief. The little girl hugged the German shepherd, who wagged his tail slowly, pressing his head into her shoulder, as if he too understood that a long chapter of their lives was finally closing. The courtroom spectators, reporters, and staff rose quietly to their feet, applauding not in celebration of a legal victory, but in recognition of the human triumph that had unfolded before them. The murmur of approval and awe was nearly overwhelming. Even the prosecutor, though visibly struggling, nodded once, acknowledging the weight of the truth that could not be denied. Outside the courtroom, cameras and microphones awaited, but no words could capture the scene fully. The child, her mother, and the German shepherd emerged into the sunlight together, their bond stronger than ever. Reporters scrambled to ask questions, but the mother held up a hand. "This is not a story for headlines," she said firmly. "This is our family's truth. And for now, that is enough." The little girl looked down at the dog and whispered, "We did it. Doggy, we told them." The German shepherd nuzzled her gently in response, a silent acknowledgement of the partnership that had carried them through grief, fear, and silence. For Officer Daniels, the day marked a turning point. The weight of his decision still pressed on him, but he felt a spark of redemption. He had allowed fear to guide his actions for too long. Today, truth had broken through, and it had changed everything. Inside the now empty courtroom, the judge lingered for a moment, her gaze resting on the empty witness stand, where the child had spoken with such clarity. She scribbled a note in her file. Justice is not blind to innocence. Loyalty is not silent in the face of truth. Remember this day. The halls of the courthouse, once filled with tension and secrecy, now felt lighter, as if the air itself had been cleansed by the honesty of a child and the loyalty of a dog. As the family left, the little girl skipping beside her mother, the German shepherd at her heels, one thing was clear to all who had witnessed the events: the smallest voices and the quietest witnesses sometimes carry the loudest truths. And in that truth, a family was made whole again. The sun shone down on the trio, warm and bright, as if blessing the reunion. The world outside would continue with its complexities, its chaos, and its challenges, but inside the hearts of this mother, daughter, and faithful companion, peace had returned earned through courage, loyalty, and love. And somewhere, beyond the veil of uncertainty that had haunted them for so long, the spirit of Officer James Carter seemed to linger, proud and at peace, knowing that his last command to protect his family had been faithfully fulfilled.